How many were here yesterday? I see participated. So glad you're returning for information today, and welcome to all those who are coming for the first day. The decision to develop and implement this learning outcomes initiative originated with the academic plan, and it's part of our institutional effort to implement the academic plan. So keep in mind that this initiative is primarily about supporting student learning by making explicit the knowledge, skills, and values that students will acquire during a course and a program. So through the center, our intent following this series is to begin to provide support and information to faculties and departments to assist you with either developing or clarifying the learning outcomes initiative or confirming that it's already done. And of course, we are not starting from scratch with this because quite a few of our programs already have designated outcomes, primarily the professional programs that require them for their accreditation purposes. So we're not really starting from scratch here. In fact, this has been with our institution for a very long time. I first came in 1991, and what I'll say here, let me see, was someone familiar to Ron Smith and Tom and others who came about that time, and John. But at that time, our legal name was still Caribou College, and we were making the transition into becoming the University College of the Caribou, and looking forward to offering our first standalone degrees, which the University College status allowed us to do for the first time. So I was involved in developing the Bachelor of Natural Resource Science degree program. And so in order to have any of these new programs approved, we had to have learning outcomes stated for all of the courses in each one of those programs. Let me see, here's a test of memory for some of your old timers. Do you remember a provincial organization called C2T2? Yes. It stood for the Center for Curriculum Transfer and Technology. It was provincially funded, and the purpose of that organization was to help with the networking and professional development around teaching issues in the province. And in the mid-90s, they had a team of people who came and put on some workshops about learning outcomes, explaining what they were and why they were a good idea and the ways in which they supported student learning. So I was first involved in the mid-90s in helping to put on some of those workshops to explain learning outcomes to our faculty. Some of you also may remember a poster from around the mid-90s, 97, 98, something like that. It was plastered all over campus in the newspapers, and the tagline was 7 degrees and growing. Do you remember that? We were so proud of that, 7 degrees and growing. So, anyway, that's some of our past history. So what we're doing is making explicit here in this new initiative what we've been doing for a long time. We're just formalizing it, we're organizing it better, and we want to bring that back to everybody's attention. So this morning we want to welcome back Peter Wolf for day 2 of his stay with us here. Now Peter's been involved with educational development and higher education for over 15 years. He is currently the director of the Center for Open Learning and Educational Support at the University of Guelph. He's been part of the Ontario province-wide initiative that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, the undergraduate degree level expectations, which I understand are locally known as your oodles.
Oodles.
He's also a member of the Engineering Graduate Attributes Group. He's done a lot of work with engineering learning outcomes and supporting the Canada-wide transition to an outcomes-based accreditation. And his topic for today is developing the program-level outcomes assessments about the process and how we would like to engage faculty in that process. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I have to say, I'm so impressed with your lovely city. The terrain is fantastic, and your university is beautiful. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, let me ask you, I am impressed and shocked at how many of you are here, at how many of you were at the town hall yesterday. Can you tell me why this is, what the motivation, why are you all here? Free coffee. Free coffee, all right. Should have been in my hotel then, you wouldn't have had to come. They had free coffee too.
Instead of doing our marking.
Sorry? Instead of doing your marking, yeah. I mean, this is such a busy time. I was really surprised. I know the accreditation is on the table. Is that the main driver? No. So what do you see as one of the drivers? You moved your head, so you have to talk now. It's like an auction. You just bid.
Well, I guess just understanding better what our program's doing and how we could make it better.
Yeah.
And, just sort of clear goals and expectations.
Clear goals and expectations.
A lot of retirements coming through now, and we would like to, as we bring in younger faculty, to instill some of the culture too. So having a help.
So you're going through a big transition now in faculty retiring? Is that part of what's going on? We went through that about 5-6 years ago, where in the period of, no, 7 or 8 years ago, where in the period of 2 years we had 180 faculty. We have 800, and we had 180 faculty new within like 2 or 3 years. So you're right, that is a big opportunity to kind of bring in a different way of approaching, and that really worked for us as well. I would think a lot of our curriculum work really took off around that time too. For us, it was a number of years ago, but and our goal when we started doing it was exactly what what's your name? Rick. Exactly what Rick's saying, which is we were interested in helping departments and programs and degrees to figure out how to improve, how to get a sense of what's actually going on, whether what we assume or what we hope students to be learning is actually being learned, or what is being learned, and to really get some depth into understanding the aggregate of our courses. And I think that's a really important piece that we really haven't, at least in my experience, many schools and many programs haven't gotten their head around. In our school, we have 40 courses that students will take over their 4 years with us. At the end of that, there's a group of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. There's the individual course level, but how do those feed together to create, to help foster the kind of graduate that we'd be proud of? And then once we've done that, once we can assess our effectiveness and our students' effectiveness, then we can figure out where the issues are and what we can do to improve it. Any other motivations for being here? Accreditation, continuous improvement?
Well, I also think students have changed in the past 20 years. I mean, they're much more technologically driven and I find much more demanding in many ways. So how do you satisfy the students of today?
Yeah, it's amazing to me when I think back to my undergraduate days that I just took it on faith that all these courses would, these 4 years of experience would get me somewhere, assuming that that had been given thought. And I think in some cases it was, and in some cases it wasn't. And I think what we're trying to do now is hone up those processes. Our main motivation is really to continuously and systematically understand what's going on with our students in our programs. And that's really what this is all about. Any other reasons why you're here? Any other drivers, motivations? Yeah? Okay, great. Let's talk about what we're going to do for the next hour or so. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the ideal curriculum development process. We'll talk about developing and assessing program outcomes. I thought it might be an interesting introduction. Come on, move over. If we watched a short video. Does anybody remember? Yeah? All right, I know who's over 40 and who's under. For those of you who don't know this gentleman, he used to be on Saturday Night Live. He was a character by the name of Guido Sarducci, and he was a parody, a spoof. And he does a really funny, I think it's funny, very entertaining piece that I thought was relevant today. So let me just switch over and we'll watch a video for a couple of minutes. Hopefully you can hear this okay.
I think it don't matter where you go to school. Italy, America, Brazil, it's all the same. It's all just memorization. And it don't matter how long you can remember anything, just so you can parrot it back for the test. And I got this idea for a school I would like to start. Something called the 5-minute university. And the idea is that in 5 minutes, you learn what the average college graduate remembers 5 years after he or she got out of school. Would the cost like $20? That might seem like a lot of money, $20 just for 5 minutes. But that's for like a tuition, cap and gown rental, graduation picture, snacks, everything. Everything included. You know, like in college, you have to take a foreign language. Well, at the 5-minute university, you can have your choice. Any language you want, you can take it. Say if you want to take Spanish, what I teach you is, ¿Cómo está usted? That means, how are you? And the answer is, muy bien. Means very well. And believe me, if you took 2 years of college Spanish, 5 years after you're out of school, ¿Cómo está usted? Muy bien. What all are you going to remember? So in my school, that's all you learn. You see, you don't have to waste your time with the conjugations, vocabulary, all that junk. You just forget it anyway, and what's the difference? Economics, supply, and demand. That's it. Business is you buy something, and you sell it for more. Theology, I'm going to have a theology department, you know, since I'm a priest all right. And what you have to learn in theology is the answer to the question, where is God? And the answer is, God is everywhere. Why? Because he likes you. That's kind of a combination of the Disney and Roman Catholic philosophy. It's just perfect, you know, the late 70s, early 80s, you know, just perfect. Well, after the courses are all over, then it's a time for a little Easter vacation. No time to go to Fort Lauderdale, only lasts like 20 seconds. But what I do for you, I like to turn on the sun lamp, you know, I give you a little glass of orange juice. That's the snack department, orange juice. And then after vacation, you know, after this swallow real quick, then it's a time for the final exams. I say to you, ¿Cómo está usted? You say, muy bien. Where is the God? The God is everywhere. Economics, supply and demand. Then I put on your cap and a gown. I get out to my Polaroid camera. You know, make a little snap and flash a picture for you. I give you the picture. You give me $20. I give you the diploma. And you're a college graduate. Ready to go. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure, right next door to the 5-minute university, I'm going to open up a little law school. You got another minute?
There we go. All right. Oops. Sorry about that. Hold on one second.
Grad school, what, 10 minutes?
There we go.
Or a lifetime.
It's funny. That's from the late 70s. Can we all relate to this 5-minute university? It's actually not a bad idea. The reason I showed it is really about, that's what we're asking you to think about. What's your 5-minute university? What are the things that you want students to be able to know, do, and value in their 5 minutes that they're going to remember 5 years from now? That's what we're trying to do. And he displays it very well. So let me talk a little bit about the ideal curriculum development process. And I say ideal because it doesn't often work this way. But this is, if I were king of the world, this is how we would design curriculum. We would take a look at university learning objectives. Do you have university learning objectives? Oh, I hear a resounding ambivalence in the room. Do you have learning? Do you have your university? Yes.
Yes, skills-based learning, knowledgeable and skilled problem solvers. That's what.
And is that articulated
Our
somewhere
academic plan.
in the academic plan? That's great. So that would be a good place to start. The university provides kind of the bigger context. In Ontario, we even have a bigger context, which are those DLEs, the degree level expectations, which I'll show you in a minute, around which all programs will be reviewed against, I think starting next year or the year after. So everybody in Ontario is getting their heads around program outcomes. Taking a look at what the university outcomes are is important because hopefully your university outcomes have articulated not only what might be the same as other universities, but also what's unique about your university. For example, from my perspective in Ontario, we don't have many schools that go from the trades all the way to you have PhDs yet? No, not yet, but you have graduate degrees, right? I mean, that's quite a range that certainly Guelph wouldn't think about. And that may be a real strength. Certainly it's a differentiating factor in my perspective. I don't know what relative to other schools here in BC. And it gives a larger context of how the school sees itself. And that's important, but it's only the first step. Where the rubber tends to hit the road is around program outcomes. When you see things like, at a university level, critical thinker or good communicator, and they're usually that broad, those are fine, but what a good communicator looks like in economics is different from what a good communicator looks like in plumbing. Or someone who works well in teams is going to do that differently if they're an engineer than if they're a philosopher, perhaps. And so it's at this level where the translation becomes really important. This is where we articulate what we want in our programs, in our degrees, in our department, however you're divvying up your university. This is where the rubber hits the road, and this is where the disciplinary meaning comes in. From there, we can kind of think about what is the foundational content? What are those threshold concepts and those things like return on investment, like cost benefit, like all of those things that we see as essential content. But we're also adding in, and that's not that different, this is what we do all the time. What we're adding in here also is what are those educational experiences that we think in our discipline will foster the achievement of program outcomes. Another term for that is signature pedagogy. So if you think about law, what's the predominant way that lawyers teach law students? What are those ways that you might think of? Socratic method, absolutely. They're going to do a lot of case law and moot and yeah, that kind of thing. What about in geography? What do you think a signature pedagogy might be for geography? Yeah, we did that yesterday. Field courses. Now I know who was paying attention. Thank you very much. Field courses are traditional. What about business school? What do you tend to do in business schools? Case studies. Also case studies. What about social work? Placements, for example. Same thing in teacher's school. So in each of the disciplines, we kind of implicitly oriented our teaching towards ways that we think are most effective. And we do want to leverage that. And so at Guelph, for example, we're starting a school for civil society. And the major pedagogy will be running an NGO, a non-governmental organization. And that'll be the way that students practice, apply, and demonstrate their skills that they've learned through being exposed and learning the foundational content. So it's a combination of these two that are critical. Often we'll only think about the content that they need to learn. We're being more explicit about the ways that they might learn that. And then it's required, and then we develop the program structure with our required and elective courses. In my experience, we often start down here. When a new faculty comes in, we say, oh, what do you want to teach? We build that into the curriculum. Not always, but that's often the way it happens. And then we almost work up, which is much harder to do. And I think what we want to do is gather all of this information, and it starts really here. This will be the same for everybody. This becomes unique to your degree or your department or your program. And so the first question we're asking in curriculum is, what are the knowledge, skills, and values that we want to foster in our students? There's almost a, I want to critique myself in the moment, that there's almost an implication, a patronizing piece to this that says the students aren't part of the development of their program outcomes. We're going to tell them what they need to learn. And that's not exactly the kind of relationship we'd like to foster. But I think what we need to do is make sure that we understand what we think are the minimum acceptable standards. Not the maximum, but the minimum acceptable standards that we want our students to achieve. It doesn't suggest that we can't have student-driven outcomes in this as well. And so some programs have developed, one of the program outcomes is students will develop their program outcome, so that it builds in the student interest and direction as well, especially in open curriculum like Bachelors of Arts, where you tend to have a lot of choice. When we're talking about developing that list of knowledge, skills, and values, before I go on to that, when we say knowledge, skills, and values, that's kind of a standard phrase that people like Gary and I use every day. I just want to stop and talk about what we mean by knowledge, skills, and values. I find that skills is the place where people get stuck in an academic setting, where skills become the ability to write. That's, when we're talking about skills in this model, it's actually physical skills. And so you can think of this knowledge, skills, and values also as head, heart, hands. Often in a university setting, we don't have that many hands. We don't do that much psychomotor in many of our programs. But in a lot of your programs here, you will. And so I just want to distinguish head, hands, heart. You can also think of it as the values. Sometimes people don't like the word value. It's also habits of mind. Critical thinking would be a value as well as a knowledge piece. So I just want to be clear that when we're talking about is head, hands, heart. And that can make a difference, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. When we're trying to answer the question, what are the knowledge, skills, and values that we want to foster in our students, we look at a number of places. For example, we look at university learning outcomes, but that's not all. We also look at existing program outcomes. In our school, we've had learning outcomes for a long, long time, and when you propose a new program, you have to include program outcomes. Those were often designed by the person who was proposing the program, who did it themselves, who then submitted it to Senate, and then it went into a drawer, and then they started to actually build the program. What we want to do is get those program outcomes back out and see if they're still relevant. Do you develop program outcomes for new programs as well? Is that part of the requirement through your, great. So that's a good place to go back and look. Someone had given this some thought. May not be where you're going, but it's a good place to look. Especially those disciplines that come with accreditation and have professional associations, they'll have, more than likely, they will have a list of competencies, a list of outcomes, a list of objectives. The language could be anything, but likely they'll have something there already in place in that. So it's always worth looking at that. And then finally, we also look at similar programs. So, one of the most important parts, and I think I'm stressing it already enough, is that the program outcomes really have to be stated in disciplinary norms and language. Because this is the place where your faculty will connect and your students will connect into this. And I'll show you an example of that. Let me first show you the OCAB degree level expectations. Are any of you familiar with this? Ontario decided that we needed to have an understanding of what a bachelor's degree meant, and that we needed to have a common understanding, given globalization, access through technology to any university in the world, increased travel between countries. What do we do with that new Canadian from India with an engineering degree? And so a lot of this was around understanding how our systems meet each other in terms of the standard. It may seem like a very much an internal exercise that you're doing now, but really what we're doing is trying to understand and trying to align what a bachelor's degree is. From Ontario, from Guelph, from TRU, from wherever it is. So it goes beyond the need, and I think Ontario kind of got ahead of the game looking at the UK and Australia, which has gone this way in a very serious way for the last 10 or 15 years, and identified, and all of these have definitions, and you can go to the source document and you can see all the definitions in here. But this is the broadest definition of what everybody should be getting out of a bachelor's. Anything strike you about this list? Yeah, me too. Awareness of the limits of knowledge. That one surprised me, to be honest with you. The other one seemed easy fit. I was quite curious about that one. But there it is, and there's a definition of it. And I think it's a fair to say that quite often in an undergraduate degree, and I think this might be where this one comes from, quite often in an undergraduate degree, we tell students everything they need to know, and then in the graduate degree, we tell them we don't really know that. And I think this is about making that more explicit in the undergraduate experience. I know that was a little snarky, but I think we do tend to do that sometimes, where we give the absolute, here's what we know, and then you get into doing your own research, and then we say, well, let's make sure, or let's really test that out. And that's great, except students who don't go on to masters don't understand necessarily that. So it's an interesting addition, however you think of it. So that's the broadest level. Think of that as the biggest of the Russian dolls. For us, underneath that is our university learning objectives, which just got approved this year, this spring. We had learning objectives that were designed in 1989. So we've had a long history. I'm not sure that they were always alive and living and actively used, but they were there. And now we revisited them. Some of them didn't really make sense 20 years later, 15 years later. I'm still trying to figure out, after being at the university for 15 years, what aesthetic maturity means. And that was one of our outcomes previously. So I'm glad that we've gotten a little bit more concrete. Aesthetic maturity. Anybody? No. Nobody at Guelph either. So we went through quite a long process. And when we looked at what our learning objectives were, we actually did a really big environmental scan. And one of the key documents, I think it was mentioned yesterday, one of the key documents that we looked at was an initiative in the United States called LEAP, which stands for, very patriotically, Liberal Education and America's Promise. But really what it is are, going back to the degree level expectation, are some version of expectations at the degree level for everybody. And so that was one of the documents we looked at, and you can find that, it's everywhere on the web. You can just Google LEAP and you'll find it. It's quite interesting, actually. I'm not sure I like the acronym, but the project itself is very interesting, and that was one of the key documents we used. We went through an internal process of consultation, and you can imagine all of that. And in the end, we came out with these as our learning outcomes. Again, each of them have a long definition underneath, and each of them have a rubric attached to them to help departments at their program review time assess these. They don't have to use it, but they can. It's a resource that was developed as part of the developing of learning outcomes, saying we need to also understand the degrees of sophistication within that. And so that's been given now to all the departments for them to play with and adjust as they see fit. And in the end, starting a year and a half from now, everyone in program reviews will be accountable for these. They won't be accountable for the OCAV degree level expectations. All we'll have to do is go, global understanding fits under whoa, it doesn't fit under there. Global understanding actually fits under the professional capacity, if I remember the definitions correctly. Communicating is absolutely under here as well. It's interesting how a lot of them are under there. The idea of professional and ethical behavior. Literacy, and what we mean by literacy in our case is not necessarily just reading and writing, but it's information literacy. It is the literacies as to be defined by those disciplines. So is that information literacy? Is it literacy in the reading and writing sense? What does that mean? And so these have now passed, I have to say, with very little controversy. I was at the Senate meeting when these got passed, and there was some talk around this, the professional and ethical behavior, and professional, and some of the humanities wondered what that meant in their context. And there were some good questions, but in the end, people saw these as a reasonable alignment of what every student graduating with a bachelor's degree should have when they leave. Any comments or, yeah?
Well, you mentioned the previous objective that wasn't so clear, and so there's obviously a very strong importance to having clear objectives that everyone understands. And I actually have gone through a number of objectives from various universities, and it seems like they're all over the map. Some of them are, I don't even know what they're talking about, and some of them are extremely clear and very easy to follow. So I think that's an important thing for us to recognize as we move forward, that we have to have clear, crystal clear learning objectives.
Well, the idea of, I agree with you. I also haven't seen that happen, crystal clear, in that even in this room, understanding of what this might mean is going to differ. And the idea is that it's supposed to differ from your discipline to discipline. We're not trying to create a university program outcome. We're trying to create your disciplinary program outcome.
No, I agree. You're going to have differences from discipline to discipline, but I'm talking more about the use of vocabulary so that people are understanding what that means.
Yeah, nomenclature is very important in this, and we actually early on developed a little glossary to help us with that. What do you call an outcome, a competency, an objective? In my world, they're all different. I don't know if it matters in your world. So I think, yeah, right, understanding kind of where you're pegging this is really, really quite important. Yes, okay.
Even though you said you're not accountable for the provincial level of framework, isn't there some oversight at the provincial level about asking you where the alignment is?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll show you where that comes into play. Let me show you, though, before I come back to that, let me show you how that even gets more specific. So in one particular case, and I'll just show you one example, this is our Bachelor of Arts and Sciences program. Very interesting program in that it's 2 minors, no major. One on the arts, one in the sciences. These are where the future medical ethicists will come from. But you can imagine there's only 6 courses that are core to this program. Everything else is minors taken outside of the department. So the combinations are almost infinite. So that's a very difficult program to lay out outcomes for. And we got the philosophy prof and the physics prof, and we got all those profs sitting around a table and articulated what's unique about this program. This program was designed to bring together the disciplines. That is its uniqueness. And so that became the focus for at least some of their program outcomes. And that became, so if you take a look, pose and solve problems by drawing on and integrating protocols and methods from your minors. conduct traditional and electronic research in the humanities, social sciences, and scientific context. This is pretty unique, this program outcome. We had to think about what's the aggregate of it all. How do these all the courses fit together? How do we bring the shape so that at the end of the program, we know, or we can assess whether students are able to do these things? This is meaningful to most faculty, to most students. This less so, this less so. But they're all connected. So behind the scenes, and this gets to what Gary was suggesting, behind the scenes, this outcome is linked to the appropriate one of our university outcomes, is linked to the appropriate OCAV degree level outcome. So at the faculty level, we don't have to worry about this. We don't even have to really worry too much about the university outcomes. As long as there's a line drawn from program outcome to university outcome to degree level expectation, you can focus at the degree level, where it makes the most sense for your students and for your faculty. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? How many of you actually have developed program outcomes so far? Oh, a couple of very unenthusiastic hands. Oh, for such an energetic group, that was really not consistent. So we're going to do that now. I am going to ask you to try it out. If you've done it, you can use some of the ones you've written. If you haven't, ask yourself the question, what are the knowledge, skills, and values? What's the head, heart, hands that you want your students to leave here with? Don't write yet. We're going to give you sticky notes. And write a program outcome on a sticky note, and write as many as you can think of. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to think about your program outcomes. If they're not right, it's okay. This is just practice. So we have sticky notes coming around. Here they are. And so just write one program outcome on one sticky note and just put it aside for the moment. Think about at the discipline level. What are those knowledge, skills, and values? What's your 5-minute university? Students will be able to finish that sentence. By the end of this program, successful students will be able to, and think head, heart, hands. Not surprisingly, poor awareness of limits of knowledge is the saddest, loneliest. This is often what we find, and you may not even have that in your provincial or institutional, but it is interesting, and it's everywhere I go, that this is the one that people are uncomfortable with. Also within here, ethics tends to be something we tend to be uncomfortable with in our curriculum, just as a little note for you. What's interesting is when I, as an educational developer, as a curriculum developer, mostly in my past life, but when I was doing a lot of that, when I would look at outcomes, often they were from disciplines I have no idea anything about. What I would look at was the verb. And I see here access and synthesize. I see understand the historical development, display a work ethic, determine, value, demonstrate, love, nice. It's those verbs that I look for. And I'll tell you why I look at those verbs. It goes back to this head, heart, hands. The reason we identify different types and categories of learning, different domains of learning, is because each of them takes you in a different direction. Let me ask you a quick question. If you wanted to, let's say your outcome was very simple. Identify the 10 provinces on a map. Pretty easy enough. How might you teach that?
Big field trip.
Okay, fair enough. If that's your signature pedagogy, you go. But for the rest of us, now, how might you actually teach it? You might lecture. You might give a handout. You might show a video of Canada. You might show everybody, every province's flower and bird and who knows what. How might you assess it? You give them a map, you have them write on it. That's knowledge. Now let's talk about skill, psychomotor, physical. I'm taking salsa lessons. It's such a disaster. How do you think I'm being taught the physical skill of dance? Show. I watch it. I watch the real dancers do it. They break it down into little steps for me. They put the steps on the floor. I do this, a lot of that. They take away the steps on the floor. I now do it with a partner. I now do it with music. Very different from identifying 10 provinces on a map. And how would you assess whether I've learned how to salsa? Watch me. Demonstration. Very different from knowledge. Now let's talk about attitudes. Ethics. Let's even leave ethics. Let's talk about something a little easier. Customer service, the value of customer service. How might you teach that? Sorry? You might teach about role playing. You might bring in guest speakers who've had horrible customer experiences. You might bring in the author of a... You're going to do all of that. And how might you assess that?
Put them to work in the registrar's office.
All right, fair enough. If we don't have a registrar's office, any other ideas?
Their ability to respond to a case study, a scenario.
Perhaps their ability to respond to a case study?
Survey people who they serve.
You could survey people who they served. You can also do a pre-test, post-test. You can ask people at the beginning of the course, how would you deal with these specific situations? You can give that same survey at the end of the course and see what the change has been. Each domain has a different way that is oriented towards the way it's taught and the way it's assessed. Let me give you a comprehensive example. Learning how to drive a car. There's the knowledge. I need to learn the rules of the road. There's the physical manipulation of the car. And there's safe driving as an attitude. Do any of you remember your own learning how to drive? How did you learn the rules of the road? A book. A course. How did you learn how to the physical manipulation? You got in a car, the driver, the instructor had a brake so you couldn't mess up too much, and you got more independent. And how did you learn safe driving? The attitude. We saw videos of crashes. And there were a lot of scare tactics in our case used. For the 16-year-olds in Quebec, we probably needed scare tactics. And so they were all dealt with quite differently. And in the end, it's the combination of going to the driver's bureau and writing the test and doing it and demonstrating all of that, but in different ways. We write the pen and paper test to know the rules of the road. We go out with someone who's going to test our physical driving skill and our application of that knowledge. And then they're also going to be looking for safe driving and making sure you're double checking and right of way and all of those kinds of things that lead to safe driving. It's a combination of all of them. Identifying the approaches and the teaching and learning approaches and the assessment approaches are different for each of those domains. That's why it's important. You might need to use all three, as in the case of the car, learning how to drive a car. But you do them separately. Here's how you do the knowledge, here's the physical skill, and here's the attitude, and here's how we bring it together into one behavior. Likewise, when I look at those verbs, I also really primarily focus on the level of sophistication of the verb. So what we're looking at, have you all heard of Bloom? He's one of those people from 1956 that we're still talking about today. There's a lot of critique about the model. Doesn't matter. I think it's really useful in this context, as long as we use it well. And the idea is that there's a hierarchy of learning, from remembering to understanding, applying, analyzing, to creating. Likewise, this is the head, and this is the heart. I didn't have room for the skill, but there's a similar hierarchy with different words. Oh, this is the wrong way. Problem with the slide. This should be at the bottom. Reverse the order. The lowest level is receiving, highest level is internalizing. Lowest level is remembering, highest level is creating. So there, I have to fix that slide. Sorry about that. What I look at, the reason, again, this is important is because the idea is that you do need to remember before you can apply. And you do need to understand before you can analyze. And you do need to be able to synthesize before you can create. And so there is a developmental approach that we almost assume within our 1,000 level to 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000 level courses. There's almost a sense that even if we're covering similar content, there's an elevation in the level of sophistication. At least that's the assumption we work on. We have to test that out, but that's the assumption we work on. And so I look at the verb. I'm not going to go into the mechanics of writing a program outcome. I'm sure Gary and his crew can help you when you get down to that if you're not already there. The verb is what I look at. That indicates to me the level of sophistication of learning that you're seeking. And that's the level that you should be teaching to and assessing to. Do you ever hear students say, geez, that exam was easy? Or, we never covered any of that in class. When I hear that, it's not always the students. Sometimes there is a misalignment between our level of assessment and our level of teaching. And this helps to get our heads around it. So think about the triangle of, the outcome, and in my case, the verb, because I don't understand a lot of what you're doing in your disciplines. The verb is key. The more concrete the verb, the more likely it is that you can give some level of assessment of it. The Bloom would suggest that words like know and understand aren't really helpful in that they don't delineate level of sophistication. You can know something at this level, you can also know it at that level. Knowing doesn't define it. Understanding, you can understand at this level, you can understand at that level. It doesn't suggest the level of sophistication that you're seeking. And so what we're looking for ideally are those concrete words. And by the way, if you see an outcome that says by the end of this program, students will be able to critique blah, 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 whatever that content is, the end assessment is have them critique it. The verb identifies the way you should assess it. You could assess it as well. So if it's explain, well, you're going to have them explain. It's going to be oral, it's going to be written. If they're going to compare, well, that's what they're going to do. It's probably going to be written. They're comparing two or more. Okay. Do you have any questions about developing program outcomes? Do you feel like you have an understanding of what we're trying to do and how you might go ahead doing that? Great. The next question is, once we decided that these are our program outcomes, the next question is, where are we providing opportunities for students to learn these outcomes? And what we have a couple of different, this gets into curriculum mapping. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think program outcomes is the big piece, but I think you will get to curriculum mapping in short order. So let me describe two different types of mapping that we do. One is a really simple structure map. All we do is take the information directly from the course outlines, the course calendar, and that's the list of courses, the order they're taken, and you end up with something like this. Semester 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Green are the blocks that are core and taught by the department. The other colors are core and taught by other departments. And the blanks are electives. This was a really interesting one. Let me tell you about this one. This is an actual one we had from a couple of years ago where we did a few focus groups with students, and students were complaining about burnout midway through their program. So we had to figure out what was going on there. We did a structure map, and look at the middle of the program. No electives. All of the biggest pieces of their program take place right here. It wasn't done on purpose. It was done over time gradually without anybody looking at the big picture that they were actually overloaded, because everyone thought that it should go the end of third year, the beginning of fourth, or the end of second year, the beginning of third. That's where the big transition is. And they kept putting stuff in there without recognizing the impact of that. Once we took a look at this and the faculty went, "Hoo-ah!" Even when they saw this, what ended up coming as a result of that was this. A restructuring, sorry if it's too low, a restructuring. They actually didn't cut out too many courses, but they smoothed out the flow. Had nothing to do with what's going on in the courses. This was over and above any individual course. It was just the accumulation of lack of choice. You know, their placement was in there. They had all their big pieces all at the same place. Nobody knew. Very easy map to do. We now have one of these for every program on our campus. So we think it's pretty critical, and we let faculty and students and anyone who wants to know be aware of it, including program counselors find this really useful. Yeah?
So Peter, this is just the actual courses. At this point, you're not sort of considering what course learning outcomes
No.
are.
This is just, there is a physical structure that we impose, and quite often, at least in our school, in curriculum committees, people sit and go, yeah, we should add that one, that should be a third year, we should add one, that should be a fourth year, we should take this one out. But they weren't often looking at what the impact is broadly. This is such a simple map. Hard to keep up to date because every year courses change, so we're trying to automate the mapping through our registrar, and we haven't gotten there yet, but they're being done manually now. But people find them really useful. The other map, when we talk about curriculum mapping, is much more involved, and let me tell you about that one. This is the one where we find out, where we ask faculty where they think they're developing those program outcomes that now they've agreed to. And so instead of saying, here, we've now determined the program outcomes, course A is going to do that, course B is going to do that, course C is going to do more sophisticated of that, and then give it to the prof, we wouldn't approach it like that. The way we're approaching it is we're asking the profs which courses they teach, they think already lends itself to the program outcomes. So we're starting with faculty. We think, and it's been proven to us anyways, we think that faculty have program outcomes in mind. They're just not said. They're just not articulating. So a lot of what we're doing now is making the implicit explicit. And so let me show you what this survey looks like. We collect all of the courses in that curriculum. We articulate their program outcomes. Again, usually 7 to 20. I like 15. Other than that, it gets pretty hard, but they often go up to 20. Then we listed all of their pedagogical approaches. We talked about signature pedagogies before. This is where we'd be listing those. And all the ways that they typically assess. And then we ask for each course, for each outcome, what are your instructional methods? What are your assessment approaches? Which of the 7 to 20 outcomes do you think this course helps to foster? And then you know, the ones you don't, we leave out. And then the 5 or so you think your course actually fosters, we ask, do you teach it? Is it explicit? Is it assessed? And if it is assessed, when is it due? And what level of sophistication are you striving for? Going back to that Bloom's taxonomy. We gather all of that data from faculty, from an online survey that we've set up. You can do this on SurveyMonkey or anything. We started using Excel and walked it around, then we went to SurveyMonkey, now we've designed our own software, a little more sophisticated. So we ask all of these questions. And we end up with aggregate data. Let me show you some of the data that comes from this. In this case, the outcome was research methods. It was a longer formal description of that, but it was around research methods. We asked all those courses that said they help to foster research methods, how do you teach it? This was our result. Hard to argue, it comes directly from the faculty. Interesting that 15 courses teach research by lecture. And The other majority is by reading. This is real data. This is not made up. Especially when we compare that to how it's being assessed. This is information we would take back to the department. So we're teaching research by lecture and we're assessing it by test. Remember we talked about the alignment between outcome assessment and teaching approach? This would be something we would bring back to the department and say, is this appropriate? It strikes us as interesting. Maybe on the test they're all research appropriate questions. It's hard for us to know. So we wouldn't assume that this is all bad and misaligned. We would then bring that back to the department and go, here's the data, what do you make of it? Does it identify an issue? And you can do this for each one of the outcomes in any multiple way. You can break it down by year. You can do all sorts of things to get the analysis of the ways that we're teaching and assessing research methods in this particular course. Did you want to?
Well, no one's individual course is identified, it's all aggregate. So.
It's really critical philosophically for us to stay at the aggregate level. Once we get into individual performance, that we would never get into. And we also assume that faculty are paying attention to their courses. And what we'll do then, one of the interesting things about this survey is it gathers together all the people who care about research methods. Now we can go, come on into a room and let's talk about how do we teach research methods. And that's where you can talk about the practices and redundancies or gaps or increasing levels of sophistication with the people who've said, I'm interested and I'm engaged.
Peter, are these results, could they be a function of just the economic times that people say, well, I don't have time to assess a research program for every student. I have 75 students. This might be the easiest and most economical way for assessment.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to think about that.
It's absolutely, we're not coming back with this result saying, bad, you're bad. That's not at all what we're doing. We're going back and saying, here's the data that you've given us. What do you make of it? And is there a problem here? There may not be. This may be appropriate. I can't say, they can say. But what I can do is say, here's the combination of the 40 or so courses that are contributing to this, or the numbers that are contributing to it. When you put ethics in there, the number stays around there. Quite often, nobody's teaching, nobody's assessing, but everybody wants it. Ethics is one of those that everyone thinks it's important, or professional practice, whatever you call it, but people are very uncomfortable in terms of teaching and assessing that. So it's interesting, it brings that out as one of the issues. Let me show you another example from our mapping survey. Here are 3 different knowledge, skills, and values. Again, what we ask is, do you teach it? Do you assess it? Civic engagement. One of the outcomes for this particular department was around civic engagement. It was a much longer outcome. We just shortened them for this. Was around civic engagement. Not one course teaches it. Not one course assesses it. Numeracy. One course teaches it. Nobody else. Written literacy. We have 4 courses who teach and assess, and 4 other courses who don't teach it but do assess writing. Very different responses. I can't say that that's inappropriate. There may be one numeracy course and that's all they need. But this is very interesting that if it's one of the 7 to 15 prime program outcomes, that we're giving it very little formal attention. Is that enough? That's for the department to answer. Very interesting information coming out of this, yeah.
Is that only in second year courses though?
This one was in second year courses.
Okay. So
yeah.
Could have numeracy.
Absolutely, and we can, with our software now, we can articulate first, second, third, we can compare them, we can do all sorts of things. There's not necessarily a problem here. I'm just showing you some of the data that comes out of it that is intriguing. And certainly you'd want to take some of that back to the department and go, is this appropriate? Not, this isn't appropriate. We would never do that. Because we don't know what goes on in the discipline, and that's for the disciplinary experts to decide. But certainly having that information will make an informed decision. And that's what we're seeking. Let me show you one last slide that comes. This is a really interesting one. No surprises here. What you're looking at is the 12 weeks of our program plus final exam. Our semester is 12 weeks long. Each color is a different course. The size of the color is the amount of the assessment, the value of the assessment. Week by week, when are things due? Aggregate. No surprises here, but certainly it's an interesting discussion to have at a retreat around, is there a way that we can level this off to get more even, consistent work, if that's desirable? I told an example yesterday of one of our departments where we did this kind of analysis, and we found that in third year, in any given semester, students could be writing up to 15 essays, all on discrete topics, all due during the same weeks. It's going to have an effect on their writing, on what we see as their writing, their grades, and their lack of rewriting. So quite interesting information that can come from here. So first thing we do is develop the program outcomes. Second thing we do is figure out where do we intend to be fostering these knowledge, skills, and values within our formal system, recognizing that a lot of the things that are learned don't happen in class. They happen through student government, athletics, living on your own for the first time, all of those other things too. That there's co-curricular, extracurricular, and non-curricular activities that also lend itself to this. And perhaps some of the things you've done of setting up student groups or student government, or department government, and advisory councils is where students are developing their writing skills or their communication skills. That's part of the university experience. We have to find a way to build those in and recognize those too. So now let's talk about, we okay with mapping? It's just a way to actually find out, so we intend to do this, how are we doing it? And then the third step here, I'm going to be finished in a couple of minutes, is the assessment piece. How do we know whether students have developed these knowledge, skills, and values? And we use a model by the name of the 4 levels of evaluation. It actually comes from a non-academic world, but I find it's a really nice model for putting together an assessment plan for program outcomes. And we look at 4 different levels. The first level is reaction. Did they like it? We do lots of that. Do you have student evals at the end of every course? You do focus groups of alumni, all those kinds of things. This is not critical, but there's plenty of evidence to suggest that if you're enjoying the learning experience, you're going to learn more. So it's one factor that's important to take into mind. I think that we put too much emphasis on it in higher ed. I would rather see a more well-rounded assessment process. That would also include the other piece that we're quite familiar with. Can the students do it? Did they master the objectives, either at a course level and at the program level? And both of these first 2 levels we do usually during the course or soon after. We assess during the course, we get evaluations right at the end of the course. But that's still not giving us the full picture of what's happening. So then we look at level 3, which says, are these newly developed knowledge, skills, and values being transferred? Do they make it their way out of the class? How many times have you said to yourself, how is it possible that first-year students didn't learn how to? They may have learned it well within that class, but it may not have transferred out. And I think we have to understand how knowledge transfers from one course to another, but also from our university experience outside of that. When we talk about critical thinking in economics, we hope there'll also be critical thinking in reading the newspaper. That there's a transferability that we're assuming. And this one tries to articulate what that is. And then finally, level 4 is, so what happened as a result? Did we get there? So let me show you what this ends up looking like. Here's a sample assessment plan. We're going to run focus groups with students every year, not just every 7 years or whenever program reviews are due. And here are the questions we're going to ask. We're going to talk to, in this particular program, we're going to talk to alumni employers. Most of the employers are alumni, so in our case, in this program, it was the same group. Alumni were employers. We would do focus groups every 2 years, and here are the questions we're asking them. Then we're looking every 5 years at other program reviews, other programs that we like, and really get a sense of where our discipline is moving. educationally. And then finally, every 2 years, we're going to have a faculty retreat around curriculum. What we're building now into our toolkit for assessment is analytics. It's a new project. We're just starting on it this fall. But what's missing from here is the actual student grades. They're not in here. It's interesting, they're not in here. And so now we're starting to build those in. This is all very developmental for us too. We're starting to build those in. So we're trying to identify, using the map, where people say, yes, I teach writing in this course. So we'll take that, or I assess writing in this course. We'll pick those spots within student assignments and draw them out to see whether we can get an aggregate, not by course now, but by skill, by knowledge, skill, and value. So we're looking crossways on the matrix now. And by gathering artifacts from different courses that all purport to help foster writing or one of the other program outcomes, we can even use student grades as an aggregate. We're going to pilot that this fall and see how it goes. I have some concerns, but we're working in that direction because grades and assessed work needs to be in here. And right now, we don't have a way to draw that out well. So we're building towards that right now. I mentioned earlier the rubrics for our university outcomes. I just wanted to, you can't really read it here. The web address is down here if you want to take a look at that or any of the other ones, and I can pass the slideshow around if you want to take a look. And we have one for each of our outcomes. This is what departments are using at program review time to articulate their students meeting, at an aggregate level, students meeting the outcomes of the program. We're starting to put these tools and processes into place to make this manageable and sustainable. But it's very much a new project. You know, we've been doing it for 8 years and we still have a ton left to do. Any questions about curriculum? Can you, yes, please.
Peter, in light of all the criticism that's been going on with students graduating from universities and working at Starbucks and all that stuff, how does this fit into helping students decide which programs they want to go into?
I don't know that it does. I don't know that's the intention, is to help students decide to get into. Where I think once the students are in it, one of the things that we're trying to build along this side, I have a vision, I have a dream, that one day alongside of this, every student will have an electronic outcomes-based portfolio that extends past the life of the university, that allows them to reflect, that built into courses, that built into capstone experiences, that make sure, because in the end, these outcomes are for students, they're not for us.
What I'm saying is that when a student looks at a calendar for a university program, would these outcomes be part of that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and more so in the future. I mean, that's what we're working towards. Yeah, very much. Yes. Let me talk for 2 minutes about change, because I think there's some issues around this whole curriculum work that I want to talk about around culture change. So just for 2 more minutes, bear with me. It really takes a combination of things to happen. The reason we move forward at Guelph, I'll be honest, more so than many other schools, our provost and our president are both 3M award winners and talk nothing but learning outcomes and teaching and learning. Our department, as the same as Gary's department, has focused on developing our own skills on how do you facilitate, how do you bring this process to life. And it's a combination of top down and bottom up that have really moved it forward. We started doing this work before it was required as part of accreditation. And we were shocked with the amount of demand. Faculty really wanted their departments to improve, had done everything they could with their courses, but recognized their courses have limits, and now we have to talk about all of the courses together. And that wanted to do that to improve their programs. And really found it quite helpful. We're still now, because we're 7 or 8 years in, we're only now getting around to reevaluating those changes we made, because they have to percolate through 4 or 5 years before you can take a look at them. So it's a long-term process. But we're trying to do every year, do something around this, and then make sure that we're always working towards it. Let me talk about the recommended practices just very quickly. The faculty-driven part is critical. If it doesn't come from faculty and students, but primarily faculty, I think that we'll get a tremendous amount of resistance if we go the college route, at least in Ontario, where some subject matter expert designs the courses and the program, you're given the course outline, and you teach it thus. We don't work like that in our university. We need to find out what the faculty are intending to do. Also, if there's not a champion within that department, this doesn't go anywhere. Doesn't go anywhere. Yeah.
It's so good to be faculty driven, but I find that if you don't have the sense that the executive is supporting it, then faculty say, why bother? And I point that out because we're in a situation now where we're having budget cuts. So we've been told to do this, and yet we've been told that our budgets are cut by 1 or 2% this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. We just have a $32 million cut. So that's what our deficit is right now. We're going through a huge program prioritization process. And I just heard that Mount Royal just cut out 4 new programs yesterday. Yeah, and yet this work is still going on.
If you cut out a program, it's different than cutting out across the board.
Yes.
Cut out across the board, you're just taking everyone's resources, and you can't get back those field trips in geography. You can't get back. Yeah. And they're so integral to your learning outcomes.
I don't want to suggest that all of this is easy, but I do want to suggest that it gives us the data from which we can make decisions. I also think that this is new work, and we do have to figure out how to resource and recognize it. Because now we're asking faculty to pay attention to your individual course, and now pay regular attention to the aggregate, and that's new work. So the resources are not inconsequential. The places that have moved forward the most have had someone devoted to championing this, and even time allocated for it. I look at engineering, and the schools that I see that have moved most forward in the engineering change from an inputs to an outcomes accreditation have been the ones who have an associate dean who's now charged with it. We haven't gotten around to that yet, but you're right, we're going to have to face that. Any other? Thanks for that. Okay. Other than that, I mean, what we're really trying to do here is move away from this model of curriculum development that is based on faculty members going for coffee every day and having the similar conversations and really cementing in their perceptions. My experience around curriculum assessment is that the programs are better than most faculty think. That we're not dealing with a problem here, we're starting from a position of strength. And this is not about competence, this is about continuous improvement. And most faculty are surprised when they find out that the program's actually pretty good. Now what can we do to make it better? And that's actually quite empowering. And so we do try to gather that data and try to get a true 360-degree perspective on what's going on. I can't stress enough the culture and context specific. What makes TRU, what makes TRU economics, what makes your programs unique? I worry a little bit about learning outcomes homogenizing. I do worry about that. I think what I've seen in engineering, so 40 schools across the country are now moving from an inputs-based accreditation, number of hours in the class, number of hours in math, to an outcomes-based. They've identified 13 outcomes. And so all of the schools are trying now to figure out, how do I assess the role of the engineer in society? Which is one of them. Very interesting. Every school's doing a little bit differently. The schools that are, I think, going to take advantage of this opportunity are those that aren't just going to focus on those 13 that have been predetermined and mandated, but are also going to add a 14th and a 15th. That says, here's how we do it at TRU. Here's what's unique about our program. Not here's what's the same about all of our programs, but here's what's unique. And I think that if we use outcomes well, we can use it as a way to differentiate, not to homogenize. But we have to be intentional about that. And then my last point to your comment was it has to be resourced and recognized. We haven't figured out how to manage that dollars-wise, and also we have to talk about promotion and tenure, and how do we recognize the tremendous amount of effort that people are putting in towards curriculum at a promotion and tenure level 2. We haven't gotten there yet. We're working on it. but we haven't solved that one yet. But it's definitely on our plate. We've definitely got to get to it in order to make this successful. That's it for me. Do you have any questions, any objections? Oh, there's one, yeah.
Just one question. I grew up with sort of a little name for wealth. It's called Moo-U.
Moo-U.
So called that?
Don't you mention that if you come to visit our campus. But yes, we're commonly known as Moo-U. But we're not anymore. But yeah, yeah. But it's that is our tradition. Certainly, animals, science, and the environment is our big area of focus.
And Canadian theatre, actually.
And Canadian theatre and fine arts. We actually got that. It's a good little school. It's a good school. If you want to know more about our wonderful little school or how we do curriculum development, talk to me. My email is pwolf@uoguelph.ca. Talk to Gary. We know each other well. This is a long-term project that you're really getting underway. The idea isn't to get it quick and over. The idea is how do we embed it and make it continuous. And so I think that if you think about that rather than, oh, I got to get through these stupid learning outcomes, let's get this done and on to more important stuff, I think you'll lose the opportunity to really use it as a way to improve your curriculum. But certainly people take that approach. I'd advise against it. That's my job to advise against it. Thanks very much. And I'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to talk. Have a good day.